The night was warm and glowing with golden lights that filled the ballroom. Elegant guests in suits and shimmering dresses moved between tables, their laughter echoing beneath the chandeliers. It was a night of celebration, a charity dinner that brought together some of the city's richest people. Waiters and waitresses moved quickly, carrying trays of food and drinks, trying to keep up with the guests' endless requests. Among them was a quiet young waitress who had joined the hotel staff only a few months ago. She kept her head down, worked carefully, and spoke only when necessary. Most people didn't even notice her. She wasn't dressed to stand out. Her simple uniform blended in with the rest of the staff. But there was something gentle about her presence. Whenever she moved, there was a kind of calmness around her. The evening went on smoothly until a problem suddenly arose. The piano player, who had been hired to perform soft music during dinner, called in sick at the last minute. The manager looked worried. Music was supposed to be one of the highlights of the night. Without it, the room felt empty, like something important was missing. While the manager was thinking of what to do, a man sitting at the center table began to speak loudly. He was one of the wealthiest men in the room, known for his expensive taste and sharp tongue. He loved attention and never missed a chance to show his power. When he saw the manager whispering nervously to a staff member, he raised his voice for everyone to hear. "What's going on? Did the entertainment forget who's paying tonight?" he said with a laugh that carried across the hall. A few people around him chuckled, eager to stay on his good side. The manager forced a smile and explained politely, "Sir, there's been a small issue. The pianist couldn't make it. We're trying to find a solution." The rich man smirked. "A solution? It's just a piano. Surely someone in this room can hit a few keys. Maybe one of your waiters can entertain us." His friends burst into laughter, clearly amused by his joke. The young waitress happened to be walking past his table at that moment, carrying a tray of drinks. His comment made her hands tighten slightly, but she kept her focus, trying not to draw attention. Unfortunately, just as she reached the edge of the table, one of the guests pushed his chair back suddenly and she lost balance for a second. A drop of wine splashed near the millionaire's sleeve. It didn't touch him, but it was close enough for him to make a scene. "Well, well," he said loudly, turning to look at her. "You can't even carry a tray properly, and your manager wants to trust you with serving guests? Tell me, do you know anything other than spilling drinks?" The laughter around the table grew louder. The waitress froze. Her cheeks turned slightly red, but she didn't argue. She only muttered a quiet apology and tried to clean the table quickly. But the man wasn't done. He seemed to enjoy the attention. "Wait," he said, tapping the table with his finger. "Since you're already here, why don't you try your luck at the piano? Maybe you can make up for your mistake. It's simple. Sit down, play something." "Entertain us." The room fell silent. Everyone turned to look at her. The other waiters exchanged nervous glances. The manager quickly stepped forward, whispering, "Sir, please, she's not—" But the waitress raised her eyes slightly. For the first time that night, she looked directly at the man. There was no anger in her expression, only quiet confidence mixed with hesitation. She didn't speak, but something about her calm gaze made the room even quieter. The millionaire laughed again, thinking she would refuse. "What's the matter? Cat got your tongue? Don't worry, I won't laugh if you mess up." "Well, maybe just a little." The crowd chuckled again. It was cruel laughter, the kind that fills the air when people forget their kindness. The young woman looked at the piano across the room. It stood near the stage, shining under the soft light, untouched and waiting. For a brief second, she seemed lost in thought. Then she placed the tray on a nearby counter, wiped her hands on her apron, and quietly said, "All right." The manager blinked. "You don't have to—" "It's fine," she interrupted softly, her voice calm but firm. "I'll play." Gasps rippled through the room. A few people whispered to each other, wondering if she was serious. The rich man leaned back in his chair, smirking. "This should be interesting," he said, clearly expecting her to embarrass herself. As she walked toward the piano, time seemed to slow. Every step echoed in the silent hall. The waitstaff watched from the sides, unsure what to think. The guests whispered, some mocking, some curious. No one knew anything about her. Not where she came from, not what she could do. She had always been quiet, almost invisible. She reached the piano and paused for a moment, her reflection faintly visible on the glossy black surface. She touched the edge of the keys lightly, as if greeting an old friend she hadn't seen in years. Her fingers trembled slightly, but her breathing was steady. She took a deep breath and sat down. Behind her, the millionaire's voice broke the silence. "Well, go on then. Let's hear our waitress show us her talent." A few more chuckles followed, but she didn't react. She looked down at the keys again, and something in her eyes changed. A spark of emotion, something that had been hidden deep inside. At that moment, no one knew the truth. Before life took a different path, she had been a talented pianist. Years ago, she spent her evenings practicing until her fingers hurt, dreaming of performing on grand stages. But life had other plans. Family troubles, financial struggles, and heartbreak pushed her dreams aside. Now she was here, wearing a uniform, serving the very people who lived the life she once dreamed of. As she rested her hands on the piano, those memories returned, the sound of old lessons, the feeling of losing everything, and the quiet strength that kept her going. She didn't plan to prove anyone wrong. She just wanted to feel the music again, even if it was only for a few minutes. The guests waited impatiently. Some of them had already pulled out their phones, expecting to record a funny moment. The millionaire folded his arms, smiling with arrogance. He whispered to the man beside him, "This will be over in 30 seconds." The waitress closed her eyes for a brief moment. The room faded away, the noise, the laughter, the judgment, all gone. Only the piano and her heartbeat remained. Then she pressed the first key. A soft note floated into the air, delicate but clear. It was unexpected, not clumsy, not random. Just one simple note that carried emotion. Then another followed. Slowly the melody began to form. It was quiet, fragile, almost like a whisper. But even in its softness, it carried something that caught everyone's attention. The guests stopped whispering. The laughter died. The millionaire frowned, unsure what was happening. The music didn't sound like something from a beginner. It sounded alive. The young woman's hands started moving more freely now, dancing across the keys with natural grace. Each note blended into the next, telling a story only she could understand. She forgot about the people around her, forgot about the man who had mocked her. In that moment, it was just her and the piano. Two old friends reunited after a long time apart. A waiter standing nearby felt a chill run down his spine. He whispered softly, "She's amazing." But the waitress wasn't playing to amaze anyone. She was playing to breathe again, to remind herself of who she was before life became so hard. The millionaire leaned back, his smirk fading. He didn't say anything now. Something about the sound made him feel uneasy, almost guilty. He didn't understand how someone so quiet, someone he had just insulted, could create something so beautiful. As the music filled the room, even the servers paused to listen. The lights shimmered gently on her face, and for a moment, the fancy guests and the working staff were equal, united by the same sound. Then, suddenly, she stopped. She lifted her hands from the keys and stood up quietly, as if nothing extraordinary had just happened. The room was silent, completely still. Even the air seemed to hold its breath. She looked down, nodded slightly, and started walking back toward her place. No one spoke. The millionaire sat frozen, unable to say a word. And though the night was far from over, something had changed. The quiet waitress had accepted a cruel challenge, and without even trying, she had turned it into a moment no one in that room would ever forget. The room stayed silent for several long seconds after she stepped away from the piano. It was the kind of silence that carried weight, not empty, but full of thought, full of surprise. The same people who had laughed at her moments ago now stared as if they had seen something they couldn't explain. The manager stood frozen near the side of the stage, not sure whether to cheer or apologize. The guests, still sitting at their tables, looked around, unsure how to react. Only the sound of glasses clinking faintly in the distance broke the stillness. The waitress, calm as ever, simply bowed her head a little and turned to return to her spot. She didn't smile or expect applause. She just wanted to slip back into the background where she had been all evening. But before she could move far, someone started clapping. It was a slow, hesitant sound at first, one pair of hands in the back of the room. Then another joined. Within seconds, the quiet hall filled with applause. People began standing one after another, until almost the entire room was on their feet, clapping for the woman who just minutes ago had been serving them food. She froze mid-step, surprised by the reaction. Her eyes lifted slightly, and she saw faces filled with admiration instead of mockery. Some guests were smiling warmly, some were even wiping their eyes. For a moment, it didn't feel real. She had played only to express what she felt, not to impress anyone. Yet here they were, cheering as if she had just performed on a concert stage. The millionaire who had started it all sat quietly at his table. His face had lost the proud smirk it carried earlier. He didn't clap right away. Instead, he stared at her with an expression that was hard to read. Part disbelief, part embarrassment, and maybe even a touch of respect he didn't want to show. The applause went on for nearly a minute before slowly fading. The young woman gave a small nod and turned to the manager, quietly asking if she could return to her duties. The manager, still in shock, just nodded. He didn't know what to say. When she went back to carrying trays, the energy in the room had completely changed. Guests who wouldn't have noticed her before now looked at her with admiration. Some whispered to each other, wondering where she had learned to play like that. Others called her over just to thank her. One older woman sitting near the front reached out gently when the waitress came by with water. "That was beautiful, dear," she said kindly. "You played with such feeling. You must have studied for years." The waitress smiled softly, replying in a quiet voice, "I used to. A long time ago." The woman nodded, clearly wanting to ask more, but the waitress moved on before anyone could press further. She didn't like talking about her past. Across the room, the millionaire watched her carefully. His friends tried to change the subject, laughing about something else, but he didn't seem to hear them. His mind replayed the sound of her music over and over. He couldn't believe it had come from someone he had just insulted. He leaned back in his chair, pretending to be relaxed, but deep down he felt something strange. Guilt. He wasn't used to feeling that. Usually, when he mocked people, they either laughed awkwardly or walked away. But this time it was different. The waitress hadn't argued, hadn't raised her voice. She had simply played, and somehow that had humbled him more than any words ever could. Later in the evening, as dinner continued, he motioned for one of the hotel staff to come over. "Send that waitress here," he said quietly. The young woman hesitated when she was told he wanted to speak with her. The memory of his earlier mockery still stung, but she didn't want to cause a scene. She placed her tray down and approached his table calmly. When she arrived, he cleared his throat. "I didn't know you could play like that," he began, his voice quieter than before. "Where did you learn?" She looked down slightly, not out of fear, but humility. "I learned when I was younger," she said simply. "My mother loved music. She wanted me to play." He nodded, unsure how to respond. His usual confidence was gone. "You were incredible," he said after a moment. "Truly, I owe you an apology for how I spoke earlier." The guests at his table glanced at each other, surprised to hear those words from him. He wasn't known for apologizing. The waitress gave a small, polite smile. "Thank you," she said softly. "You don't need to apologize. It's fine." But the way she said it, calm, genuine, without bitterness, made him feel even worse. It reminded him of how small his behavior had been. As she turned to leave, he stopped her again. "Wait," he said. "Do you still play anywhere? Professionally, I mean?" She shook her head. "No, not anymore. Life got busy. I just play when I can." He nodded slowly, realizing there was more behind those words than she wanted to share. Something about her quietness made him respect her even more. After she left, he sat in silence for a long time, barely touching his food. His friends tried to joke again, but he waved them off. His thoughts were elsewhere. Meanwhile, the waitress continued her work as if nothing had happened. But inside, her heart felt lighter than it had in years. For the first time in a long while, she had played without fear. She had reminded herself of who she used to be, the girl who loved music, who believed in dreams. The rest of the night passed with a strange mix of warmth and quiet reflection. Guests who had been busy showing off their wealth were suddenly talking about her performance instead. Some said it was the best moment of the evening. Others said it made them realize that real beauty doesn't come from money or power. It comes from the heart. When the dinner finally ended, the guests began leaving one by one. Many of them stopped by to thank her personally. Some even offered compliments that sounded more sincere than anything they had said all night. The millionaire was one of the last to leave. Before going, he found her standing near the service area, collecting empty glasses. He approached her again. this time without the loud arrogance he usually carried. "I've been thinking," he said slowly. "You shouldn't be working here. You belong on a stage. If you ever want to perform again or need help finding opportunities, I can make that happen." She looked at him surprised. "That's kind of you," she said, her voice gentle. "But I'm fine where I am. I don't play for money or attention. I play because it helps me feel alive." He nodded, still feeling the weight of her words. "You've given everyone here something they didn't expect tonight," he said sincerely. "Including me." The waitress smiled softly, grateful but firm. "Sometimes life gives us moments to remember who we are," she said. Tonight was one of those moments. He didn't know what else to say. For a man who had spent his life believing that money could buy anything, talent, respect, admiration, her simple honesty hit him harder than any speech. He thanked her quietly and walked out, his usual arrogance replaced by quiet thought. When the hall was empty and the lights began to dim, the waitress sat alone for a moment, staring at the piano again. She ran her fingers along the keys softly, just enough to make a faint sound. She smiled to herself, remembering how it felt to play, how the music had carried her away from everything else. She knew that people would probably forget by tomorrow. The guests would return to their busy, glamorous lives, and she would go back to serving breakfast in the morning. But that didn't matter to her. What mattered was that, for one brief moment, she had shared something real, something honest, with people who never expected it. As she closed the piano lid gently, she whispered to herself, "That's enough." Then she stood, tied her apron tighter, and continued cleaning up the hall. She didn't need applause or promises. The music had done what it always did, reminded her that even in a noisy world, silence could hold the most beautiful sound of all. And though the night faded away, the memory of her playing lingered in every corner of that grand room. The next morning, the sun slipped through the large glass windows of the hotel's dining hall. The same young waitress was back at work, dressed neatly in her uniform, tying her hair back the same way she always did. On the outside, nothing seemed different, but inside she carried a quiet glow that hadn't been there before. The night before had felt like a dream. She had only played a few minutes, yet those moments replayed in her mind again and again. The feeling of the piano under her fingers, the silence in the room, the faces turned toward her in awe. It all felt surreal. For the first time in years, she had felt free. As she arranged the breakfast tables, one of her coworkers came over, smiling widely. "You were incredible last night," she whispered. "People can't stop talking about you. Even the guests this morning are asking who you are." The waitress smiled shyly. "It was just a song," she said softly. "No," her coworker said firmly. "It wasn't just a song. You made that room stop breathing. Even the boss was in tears." The waitress laughed quietly, shaking her head. "I didn't even notice. I just played." Before she could say more, the manager approached. He was usually strict, always watching the staff closely, but this morning he looked different, almost gentle. "You did something special last night," he said. "I've worked here for 15 years and I've never seen the guests react like that. You should be proud." "Thank you," she said humbly. "I just didn't want to cause trouble." He smiled slightly. "Well, you did the opposite. You made everyone remember the night. Even the millionaire who mocked you left without a single rude word. That alone is a miracle." She didn't respond. She didn't want praise or attention. What she wanted was peace. But peace wouldn't last long. Later that afternoon, as the staff prepared for a smaller lunch event, the hotel manager called her into his office. "There's someone who wants to speak to you," he said with a curious expression. When she entered the room, she froze for a moment. Sitting there, dressed sharply as always, was the same millionaire from the previous night. His posture was calm, not arrogant like before. He stood when he saw her, which already surprised her. "I hope I'm not disturbing your work," he began politely. "I just wanted to thank you again. For last night." She nodded quietly. "You already thanked me," she said gently. "That was enough," he smiled faintly. "I know, but I also came to ask something." He paused, searching for the right words. "You said you used to play when you were younger. What made you stop?" She hesitated. The question pulled at something deep inside her. For a long moment, she didn't speak. Then she said quietly, "Life got hard. My family needed me to work. Music didn't pay bills, so I stopped." He listened without interrupting. For the first time, his eyes didn't hold pride or judgment, only understanding. You gave up your dream for others, he said softly. She gave a small shrug. Sometimes that's what life asks from you. He nodded slowly, clearly moved by her words. You have real talent. The kind of talent that shouldn't be hidden behind a tray and an apron. If you're ever ready to play again, I want to help. She looked at him, surprised. Help? Yes, he said, his voice firm but kind. I host events, own a few venues. I know people in the music world. You deserve a chance to be heard. I'll arrange it. All you have to do is say yes. She didn't know what to say. It was an unexpected offer, and though his tone was sincere, part of her didn't trust it completely. She wasn't used to people offering kindness without expecting something in return. I appreciate that, she said carefully, but I'm not sure. I don't think I belong in that world anymore. He shook his head. You belong wherever your gift takes you. The room fell quiet again. She could feel his sincerity, but her heart wasn't ready to believe in dreams again. Not yet. I'll think about it, she said finally. He nodded and left her a card with his number before he left. No pressure, he said as he walked out. Just promise me one thing, don't let fear decide for you. When he was gone, she stood there for a long time, staring at the small white card in her hand. That night, after her shift, she took the long walk home. The streets were quiet, the air cool and gentle. She passed by a small park where a street musician was playing guitar for a few coins. For a moment, she stopped to listen. The music wasn't perfect, but it was real, filled with emotion and honesty. She smiled softly. Something about it reminded her of herself. At home, she sat by the small window of her room, holding the card in her hand. She thought about her mother's old words about how music wasn't just sound, it was feeling. It was a language of the soul. She remembered the way her mother used to sit beside her during practice, whispering, "Play with your heart, not your hands." Tears filled her eyes, but they weren't sad tears. They were the kind that come when a heart begins to heal. The next few days passed quietly. She went to work as usual, serving guests, cleaning tables, and pretending everything was normal. But something inside her had shifted. Every time she walked past the piano in the hotel hall, she felt it calling to her. One evening, after most guests had left, she sat down again. The lights were dim, the air still. She pressed one key gently, then another. The sound echoed softly through the empty room. It was peaceful. The manager walked by, stopped, and listened for a while. You should play at the next event, he said kindly. People would love it, she smiled. Maybe, if they don't laugh this time. He shook his head. No one will laugh again. The next weekend came and the hotel was hosting another dinner, smaller but elegant. The millionaire was there again, sitting quietly at a corner table. This time he didn't demand or mock. He simply waited. When the time came, the manager gently asked her to play again. She hesitated at first, but finally agreed. As she walked toward the piano, she could feel her heartbeat quicken. The guests looked at her curiously, remembering her from before. She sat down, closed her eyes, and began to play. This time it wasn't a quiet melody like before. It was something fuller, deeper, like the sound of rain on an empty street. Every note carried pieces of her life. The struggles, the lost dreams, the quiet hope that refused to die. The room filled with warmth. Conversation stopped again. Some guests leaned closer, eyes wide. Even the staff paused to listen. The millionaire sat with his hands clasped, his eyes fixed on her. He could feel something inside him shift again. He had spent his life chasing success and respect. But now, sitting there listening to her music, he realized that all his wealth couldn't buy the kind of peace that her playing brought. When she finished, the applause was quieter this time, but deeper, more emotional. People didn't just clap. They stood in quiet respect. The millionaire walked to her after the performance. I meant what I said, he told her. Let me help you share this gift with the world. She smiled softly. Maybe one day, she said. But right now this is enough. Music isn't about the world hearing me. It's about me hearing myself again. He nodded, finally understanding. That night, as the guests left and the lights dimmed once more, she sat by the piano, her fingers resting on the keys. She wasn't famous. She wasn't rich. But she had found something greater: peace, purpose, and the quiet joy of doing what she loved, even when no one was watching. And in that simple moment, she realized something powerful. True success wasn't about applause or recognition. It was about being honest with your soul. The world had seen her as a waitress, but in truth she was something far more. She was a reminder that talent doesn't fade, it only waits for the right moment to be heard again. As the last light in the hall flickered out, she played one final note, smiling to herself. She didn't need a stage or a spotlight. She already had everything she needed, the music in her heart. The next few weeks brought quiet changes that no one could fully explain. The hotel had hosted many events before, but none had left an impression quite like that evening. Guests kept talking about the waitress with the piano, and soon word began to spread. Some came just hoping to hear her play again. Others came simply to see if the stories were true. At first, the young waitress didn't know how to handle it. She wasn't used to attention. For years, she had worked quietly, blending into the background unnoticed by most. But now people smiled when they saw her, called her the pianist, and sometimes asked questions about her music. She didn't boast or talk much. Her answers were short and humble. The millionaire who had once mocked her became a regular visitor at the hotel. But this time, his presence felt different. He didn't arrive surrounded by noise or demand special treatment. Instead, he would sit quietly in the corner of the restaurant, order a cup of coffee, and listen whenever she played. She noticed him, of course, but she didn't let it affect her. She played the same way she always did, with honesty and feeling. One evening after most of the guests had left, he approached her again. The piano lid was still open, the soft light from the chandeliers reflecting off the polished surface. She was about to close it when his voice broke the silence. "You have a gift," he said softly. "I still think you should share it with the world." She looked up, smiling gently. "The world doesn't need me," she said. "It already has so much music," he shook his head. "But not your kind. What you play, it touches people." She looked at him for a moment before replying. "Maybe that's enough then to touch a few hearts." "I don't need a stage," he smiled faintly. "You remind me of someone I knew a long time ago." She used to say things like that. "Who was she?" she asked. He hesitated, his eyes softening. "Someone I once cared about. She was a pianist too, but I was too focused on money back then. I didn't see the beauty in what she did until it was too late." There was a long pause between them. The waitress looked down, her fingers resting lightly on the piano keys. "Sometimes we realize what matters only after it's gone," she said quietly. He nodded. "That's true." The room fell into silence again. He seemed lost in thought, and for the first time the weight behind his eyes showed. It wasn't the proud man who had mocked her that night. It was someone softer, someone carrying regret. Finally, he said, "Would you let me organize a small concert for you? Nothing grand, just something simple. People deserve to hear what I heard." She hesitated. "I don't know," she said honestly. "Performing in front of strangers. It feels strange. I'm not that person anymore." "But you could be," he said gently. "You already are. You just forgot." Her heart ached a little at those words because deep down she knew he was right. There was a time when she dreamed of being on stage, of sharing her music. But life had changed her dreams into quiet survival. Still, something inside her, that faint spark, hadn't completely gone out. She didn't say yes that night, but she also didn't say no. Over the next few days, she thought about it often. While serving tables or cleaning the hall, she would find herself glancing at the piano, imagining what it would feel like to play again, not just for guests passing by, but truly perform. One evening, she sat alone after her shift, the lights dim and the piano shining softly in the corner. She placed her hands on the keys not to play, but just to feel their coolness beneath her fingertips. It was strange how something so simple could bring so much peace. The next day, she found a note left near the piano. It was from the millionaire. It read, "The world needs more of what you have. Don't hide your light. If you ever change your mind, I'll make sure you have a place to shine." The note was short, but it made her heart stir. For someone who had once used his wealth to mock others, his words now felt sincere. Maybe he had changed too. A week later, the hotel prepared for another charity event, one hosted by the same man. This time he requested her presence not as a waitress, but as the evening's performer. When she first heard about it, she refused. "I can't," she told the manager. "It's too much," but the manager smiled. He said he won't hold the event unless you agree to play. He wants you to have that moment. She thought about it for a long time. Fear whispered in her ear. reminding her that she wasn't ready, but something stronger spoke in her heart, a quiet voice telling her that maybe this time it was okay to step forward. On the night of the event, she stood behind the stage, her hands shaking slightly. The crowd was large, dressed in fine clothes and sparkling jewelry. The piano stood in the middle of the stage, waiting. The millionaire gave a short speech talking about dreams, second chances, and how life sometimes hides beauty in unexpected places. He ended by saying, "Tonight you'll hear something real. A reminder that greatness doesn't always come from wealth or fame. Sometimes it comes from humility." Then he turned toward her and nodded gently. She walked onto the stage slowly. The lights were warm but not blinding. She could feel dozens of eyes watching her. For a moment she wanted to run away, but then she remembered that feeling, the peace that music brought her, and she sat down. Her fingers hovered over the keys. The first note was soft like a whisper, then another followed. The melody unfolded, gentle at first, then stronger, flowing like water finding its path. The sound filled the hall, reaching every corner, every heart. People forgot to breathe. The millionaire, sitting near the front, closed his eyes, letting the music wash over him. He wasn't thinking about money or success anymore. All he felt was gratitude. Gratitude for a moment that reminded him of everything he had once lost and everything he still had the power to appreciate. As the song grew, the emotions deepened. Her music spoke of struggle, of dreams buried but never fully gone, of love and quiet strength. It wasn't just a performance, it was her story told without words. When the last note faded, silence filled the hall. For a few seconds, no one moved. Then slowly, the applause began, soft at first, then growing louder, stronger, until the entire room stood on its feet. The waitress stood too, bowing her head slightly. Tears shimmered in her eyes, though she tried to hide them. It wasn't pride she felt, it was relief. She had faced her fear. She had shared a part of her heart that she thought she'd lost forever. The millionaire approached her on stage not as a powerful man, but as a friend. He extended his hand and said quietly, "You reminded everyone tonight what real beauty sounds like." She shook his hand, smiling through her tears. "Thank you," she said softly, "for believing when I couldn't." The crowd continued to clap, some even wiping their eyes. It wasn't just admiration, it was connection. In her music, they had all found a piece of themselves. That night became one the hotel would never forget. People spoke of it for months, not because of the wealth in the room, but because of the heart that had filled it. And as for her, she didn't become a celebrity. She didn't chase fame or fortune. But she kept playing, sometimes for guests, sometimes just for herself. Each time she touched the piano, it reminded her that no matter how far life takes you from your dreams, they never truly disappear. They only wait for you to remember them. And for the millionaire, that night changed him too. He began to treat people differently when with kindness, patience, and understanding. He realized that true power wasn't in how loud your voice was, but in how deeply your actions could touch others. Their paths had crossed by chance, but maybe it wasn't chance at all. Maybe life had brought them together so both could remember what really matters: compassion, humility, and the simple beauty of a human heart unafraid to feel. Days turned into weeks, and the echoes of that unforgettable night slowly faded into memory for most people. But for her, it marked a quiet turning point, one she didn't completely understand until much later. She still worked at the hotel, though now her shifts were a little shorter and her role a little different. Management had asked her to play the piano in the evenings, turning ordinary dinners into moments of calm and beauty. Guests often lingered longer now, sipping their drinks while listening to her soft melodies. Her music wasn't loud or showy. It was gentle, the kind that touched people without demanding their attention. Some nights she would see guests wiping tears from their eyes, though they couldn't explain why. It wasn't sadness exactly, and it was something deeper. Something about the honesty in her playing stirred emotions they didn't know they carried. The millionaire continued to visit from time to time. But unlike before, he came quietly, almost humbly. Sometimes he would bring a friend or two, introducing her simply as the one who reminded me what life is really about. He didn't boast about her story. He didn't try to take credit. He just listened, and somehow that respect meant everything to her. One evening he found her sitting at the piano long after the dining room had emptied. The candles were nearly burned down, and soft shadows danced across the floor. She was lost in a melody, something slow and tender like a lullaby. When she finished, he said, "You never told me where you learned to play like that." She looked up, smiling faintly. "From my mother," she said. "She used to play when I was little. We didn't have much, but she always said music made the world feel bigger. When she passed, I stopped playing for a long time. I guess I was afraid it would hurt too much." He nodded quietly, understanding the kind of loss that left an empty space words couldn't fill. "And what made you start again?" he asked. She thought for a moment, then said softly, "That night, when you asked me to play, I don't know why I said yes. Maybe it was because I needed to remember her, or maybe I just needed to remember myself," he smiled. "Sometimes life has a strange way of leading us back to who we really are." For a while, they sat in silence. The world outside was quiet, and the soft hum of the city felt far away. There was peace in that stillness, and the kind that comes only after storms. Months passed, and her name began to spread beyond the hotel. A local music school reached out, asking if she would teach part-time. At first, she laughed at the idea. "I'm not a real teacher," she said. But they insisted, saying the children didn't need perfection. They needed heart, and she had plenty of that. So she began teaching small groups of children in the afternoons. They were noisy, curious, and sometimes distracted, but when they played, something magical happened. She didn't just teach them notes. She taught them feeling, how to make each sound carry a piece of their story. The millionaire came to visit one day while she was teaching. He stood at the back of the room, watching as the kids stumbled through a tune, laughing when they hit the wrong keys. She caught his eye and smiled, realizing how far both of them had come. After the class, he said, "I've been thinking, I want to start a small foundation, something to help kids like these learn music. No fees, no fancy rules, just a place where they can find themselves through sound. Would you help me?" Her eyes widened. "Me? Who else?" he said. "You're the reason I believe in this again." For a moment, she didn't know what to say. She wasn't used to being someone people depended on. But deep inside, she felt a quiet certainty. This was what she was meant to do, so she agreed. Together, they began the slow, patient work of building something real. The millionaire funded it, but he let her guide the heart of it. They rented a small building, nothing fancy, just a simple space with a few old instruments and bright sunlight pouring through the windows. When the doors opened, children from all over came to play, to learn, and to dream. Some were shy, some full of energy, but all found comfort in the music. The little school quickly became a home for creativity and hope. She spent her days surrounded by laughter and sound, teaching not just how to play but how to listen, to themselves, to others, to life, and the millionaire. He found peace in watching it all unfold. For the first time in years, he felt that his wealth meant something beyond luxury. It became a tool to heal, to build, to bring joy. One afternoon, he stood by the doorway of the music room, listening to the children play a simple tune she had written for them. He looked at her and said, "You know, that night when I mocked you, it was the worst version of me. I don't think I ever truly said sorry." She turned to him, smiling kindly. "You don't have to," she said. "You already made it right. People can change, that's what matters." He nodded, his voice soft. "Still, thank you for forgiving me, and for teaching me what real grace looks like." She looked around the room at the children, at the sunlight, at the piano, the same kind that had once been her escape. "No," she said quietly. "We both learned from each other. You helped me find the courage to dream again." The sound of children's laughter filled the air. And in that moment, it didn't matter who was rich or poor, powerful or ordinary. All that mattered was that two people, once strangers from different worlds, had helped each other rediscover something pure: kindness, purpose, and love for life itself. As years went by, the little school grew. More instruments, more children, more music. Every time she sat at the piano, she felt her mother's presence beside her, gentle, proud, and at peace. She never sought fame, but her story spread naturally. People spoke of the waitress who once played in a hotel and ended up touching thousands of hearts. Some came to hear her play again, but most came to feel what she gave through her music, a sense of hope that never faded. And the millionaire? He grew older but happier.